The Bever family was, on the surface, unremarkable. A modest brick house on Magnolia Court, 2 parents, 7 children, a single minivan always parked in the same spot, curtains drawn even on summer days, a mailbox with no outgoing letters. But if you lived on that street, if you walked your dog past 709 Magnolia often enough, you began to feel it. That silence wasn't peace. It was a vacuum. There were no birthday parties, no bicycles left on the sidewalk, no teenage music spilling from open windows. Sometimes the porch light flickered at odd hours. Sometimes you could hear footsteps near the back of the house late at night, too steady to be a child. And sometimes, in that stretch of darkness before dawn, neighbors said they saw the boys to shadows by the window, just watching. David Bever, the father, worked night shifts in IT. He was a man of rules, of systems, of consequences. Neighbors described him as stoic, strict, and unreachable. He rarely made eye contact. He rarely smiled. April Bever, the mother, ran the house. She homeschooled all 7 children. She believed deeply in structure, spiritual, educational, moral. She monitored the internet, limited screen time. She followed strict routines, meals at the same hour, chores in rotation, curriculum by the book. To outsiders, it might seem admirable, but to the children, it was closer to isolation. They weren't allowed to have friends outside the family. No sleepovers, no parties. Even visits to church were rare. Everything they needed, they were told, was inside these walls. But that wasn't true, not anymore, because Robert Bever was growing older, and what he needed was already rotting his mind. Robert Bever, 18, was the oldest. Tall, thin, pale, a shadow of a teenager with a voice that rarely rose above a whisper. His hair always looked unwashed. His eyes darted when spoken to. And he never ever laughed. He had the kind of stare that made people uncomfortable, but most people never got close enough to feel it. He spent nearly all his time in his room, hunched over a glowing screen. Not gaming, not schoolwork. He was researching murder. He'd read every detail of the Columbine massacre by the time he was 14. He watched hours of war footage, mass shootings, and serial killer interviews. He lurked on forums, some hidden, some public, where disaffected teens shared fantasies of bloodshed and destruction. To him, these weren't warnings. They were inspiration. Michael Bever, 16, followed his brother like a shadow. He mimicked his posture, the way he walked, the words he used. But Michael still laughed sometimes, still blinked like a normal boy. He was the kind of child people looked at and said, "He's probably just shy." He wasn't. He was becoming something else. The brothers began compiling a kill list when Robert was 17. It started small, the names of their family members, in order of how easy they would be to ambush. Then it expanded. A map of Broken Arrow, circles drawn in red ink, fast food joints, malls, gas stations, places where, after the family was gone, they would kill strangers. The final total they hoped to reach 50, maybe more, enough to beat Columbine in their journals. They called it the legacy. They wanted to be remembered, and they didn't care what for. Inside the Bever home, days passed in rhythms dictated not by joy, but by control. Each child had a chore schedule typed and printed by April, laminated sheets with checkboxes and initials. Beds were made military tight. Books were read aloud, sometimes recited word for word. There were no spontaneous outings, no fast food, no movies, no phone calls outside the family. And when rules were broken, even by accident, punishment came swiftly. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. All he had to do was appear in the doorway, and the room went still. He kept his voice even, calculated. He believed in hierarchy, and at the top of that hierarchy were him and his wife. April enforced obedience like it was scripture. She taught her children at the kitchen table in near silence. No questions unless prompted. No play until work was done. And sometimes work was never done. The kids Crystal, Daniel, Christopher, Victoria, and little Autumn lived beneath the shadows of their older brothers. But even they noticed how different Robert and Michael had become. They whispered it to each other in hushed tones, only when doors were locked. Robert's scary. Michael watches me when I sleep. Don't go in their room. Robert's door was always shut, but when it opened, a strange smell wafted out, the stink of sweat, unwashed clothes, and something metallic. Inside, computer monitors, glowing at all hours, notebooks stacked high, and weapons hidden in plain sight. Knives, a hatchet, homemade smoke bombs, and above all else, a growing belief that the world outside their house was a lie, that real meaning could only come through distraction. In 2014, the Bevers bought a GoPro camera. April thought it could be used for homeschool projects, nature walks, science experiments. But the boys had another idea. They would film the massacre. Robert tested the camera at night, speaking into the lens like a documentary filmmaker. "We're gonna make history." His voice never cracked. He sounded like someone giving a tutorial. Step 1. Disable the alarm. Step 2. Lock the front door. Step 3. Silence the small ones first. Michael could be heard in the background. Giggling.it was a plan rehearsed dozens of times. What knives to use, who would handle which victims, where to dump the bodies. They even discussed cutting the power to reduce visibility. This wasn't a moment of madness. It was a slow, deliberate orchestration of evil, and they were counting the days. It was July 22nd, 2015, a Wednesday, the last full day the Bever family would ever spend together. The Oklahoma sun had been brutal that week. Temperatures pushed into the upper 90 seconds. But inside the Bever home, windows stayed sealed shut. The AOC hummed low, muffling the world outside. The air inside was dry, still, and stifling, as if the house itself was holding its breath. April had spent most of the day in the kitchen, making her usual rotation of casseroles and boiled vegetables. Crystal cleaned the baseboards. Daniel practiced his spelling with worksheets. The two youngest, Christopher and Victoria, played with hand-me-down dolls and plastic dinosaurs on the living room rug. It was a day like any other. And yet, the boys felt something different. Electric. Inevitable. It was time. Robert and Michael had decided. Tonight would be the night. They had waited long enough, tested the locks, marked the timing of when lights were turned off, watched the exact order in which their siblings went to bed. The weapons were already hidden in the attic, cleaned and sharpened. Knives, a hatchet, duct tape. Body armor Robert had bought online under a fake name. They discussed who would die first, who was most likely to scream, who would be too small to fight back. Robert assigned roles like a war general. Michael nodded, absorbing every word like gospel. That night, dinner was quiet. They sat around the rectangular kitchen table, passing bowls of canned peas and overcooked chicken. April gave Crystal a look, a small nod of approval for how clean the house looked. David talked about a tech issue he resolved at work. Daniel asked if they could watch a movie later. Robert said nothing. Michael barely touched his food. No one noticed the tension in their shoulders. No one saw the gloves tucked into Robert's waistband. No one thought this dinner would be their last. Afterward, the younger children went upstairs to brush their teeth. April gathered plates. David turned off the TV. That's when Robert stood up and locked the front door. The front door clicked. Not loud, just a quiet slide of metal into place. But it was enough to make Crystal pause at the top of the stairs. She turned, looked down, and saw Robert standing with his back to the door, gloves on, eyes blank. Michael appeared behind him, holding something. It wasn't until she saw the knife that she realized this wasn't a game. April was in the kitchen rinsing plates when Robert moved first. He didn't say a word. He lunged. The knife pierced her back just below the shoulder blade. She screamed a sound that cracked the air like lightning. It echoed off the tile floor, into the hallway. Up the stairs, she spun around, confused, blood spreading fast across her blouse. She looked into her son's face and whispered, "Why?" Robert didn't answer. He just stabbed again and again. David heard the scream and came running. He barely rounded the corner before Michael met him head-on. The younger brother hesitated for half a second, then drove his blade into his father's side. David gasped. His hands clutched the wound. Then another stab, and another. Blood sprayed the kitchen cabinets. April collapsed beside the fridge. David stumbled backward, hit the table, and fell to the floor. Crystal, frozen at the top of the stairs, let out a scream of her own. She turned and bolted down the hallway. Behind her, footsteps thundered up. The steps. Michael. She made it to her bedroom and slammed the door, locking it. She backed into the corner, heart pounding, as the doorknob rattled violently. Then silence, then a kick. The door cracked but held. Another kick, this time harder. The frame splintered. She grabbed her cell phone, fingers shaking, and dialed 911 downstairs. Daniel had locked himself in the bathroom. He could hear the screams. He knew something was terribly wrong. His hands were slick with sweat as he whispered into the phone, "Please, my brothers are killing everyone." But before he could finish, Robert kicked in the door. The knife met Daniel's chest 20 times. Blood ran in rivulets down the white tile. His small body crumpled in the corner. Christopher, just 7 years old, tried to hide behind the couch with Victoria. 5. Michael found them. He crouched, face expressionless, and whispered, "It'll be quick," and then he stabbed, first Christopher, then Victoria, who didn't even scream. She just looked at him, confused, and said, "Stop." He didn't. 18 stab wounds. Upstairs. Crystal's door finally gave way. Michael lunged, slashing her arms. She fought, kicked, bit. Then Robert arrived. Together, they overpowered her. They stabbed her in the neck, shoulder, and chest. She collapsed, blood pooling beneath her. The brothers left, assuming she was dead. But Crystal wasn't dead. She was very much alive, and she still had the phone. Crystal lay crumpled beside her bed, her body trembling, throat slick with blood, but her mind screaming one word: live. Her right arm barely moved, her vision blurred in and out. But the phone was still in her hand. She had pressed 911. The dispatcher answered almost instantly. 911. What's your emergency? Crystal could barely speak. Her voice was shredded, breath hitching between sobs. My brothers, they're killing everyone. Her voice faded, but the line stayed open. The dispatcher tried to keep her conscious, told her help was coming, told her to stay with them. But Crystal was slipping. One last whisper. I think I'm dying. And the line went dead, but the address had been captured within moments. Broken Arrow police officers were dispatched. They were told it might be a domestic disturbance, possibly a stabbing. Unclear on how many people were inside. The first officers arrived in less than 10 minutes. They approached carefully, flashlights out, weapons drawn from the outside. The house looked perfectly normal. Porch light on, no broken windows, no screams. Then the front door creaked open, and a 13-year-old girl covered in blood stumbled into. The light. It was Crystal. Her neck was gashed, arm slashed, shirt soaked deep red. But she was alive. Barely. She looked one officer in the eye and said weakly, "They're still inside." And then she collapsed. Inside, the officers found a nightmare. Room by room, they swept the home. In the kitchen, David and April, lifeless. In the bathroom, Daniel, unmoving. In the living room, the small bodies of Christopher and Victoria, all murdered. The carpet was soaked in blood, stab wounds everywhere, walls smeared, the air heavy with copper and rot. And yet, the killers were gone. Only one door was unlocked. The garage. Footprints led into the woods. Within 20 minutes, the Bever brothers were found hiding behind a wooden fence, crouched low, still wearing tactical gloves, clothes soaked in blood. They did not run. They did not resist. They did not speak. They were arrested on the spot. At the police station. Michael broke first. His voice was flat, emotionless, like someone describing a grocery list. We were gonna kill more. Steal a car. Go town to town, the officer asked. Why your family? Michael blinked. They were the easiest. The interrogation room was cold. Michael Bever sat with his hands cuffed, fingertips stained red. He didn't ask for a lawyer. Didn't cry. Didn't even ask about the rest of his family. He simply stared at the detective across the table and waited to be asked why. Tell us what happened tonight, Michael. He tilted his head slightly. We were going to be famous. And then, methodically, he laid it all out. They had been planning the murders for over a year. Robert was the mastermind. Michael helped sharpen the knives. They studied mass shootings the way some boys study sports stats. Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook. They wanted to do more, be remembered longer. Michael said they considered poisoning the family first. But Robert liked knives. He said it was more personal. They had intended to record the whole thing on a GoPro camera, but the battery had died just before the first kill. Still, they had documented everything. Inside Robert's bedroom, officers discovered spiral notebooks filled with plans, maps of Oklahoma with red dots for future attacks. A hit list starting with their family and ending with anyone, a chart labeled confirmed kills. Target goal 50+. There was also a chilling page titled Post Massacre Plans. Steal family car, change clothes at gas station. Begin city-to-city stabbing spree, wear body armor, return to home if possible, and burn evidence. Cerebert even had a manifesto. He had written it on an old laptop with no internet connection, saved under the file name legacy_final.docx.it. Began. The world ignored us. Now they will remember. Robert remained mostly silent during his interrogation. He refused to make eye contact. When pressed, he smiled slightly. Michael wanted it too. Don't let him act innocent. The detectives asked if he felt remorse. He shook his head. It was beautiful, like watching art unfold. We executed everything just the way we planned, except for the girl. He meant Crystal. She was supposed to die, and her survival ruined the ending he had written in his mind. Word of the crime hit the public like a lightning strike. By morning, the Bever brothers was trending nationwide. Comment sections filled with disbelief. Talk shows debated how no one had seen the signs, but someone had. Crystal. She had survived not just the attack, but the years leading up to it. And now, her testimony would become the spine of the prosecution's case. At St. John Medical Center, Crystal Bever spent 7 days in intensive care. Doctors said the slash across her neck came within millimeters of her carotid artery. One wrong angle, 1 second more of pressure, and she wouldn't have made it. But she did. When she awoke, she couldn't speak at first. But when she could, she asked, "Is Autumn okay?" Her baby sister, just 2 years old, had been asleep during the massacre. She was the only one not attacked. Police had found her in a bedroom crib, surrounded by blood, but untouched. Crystal wept when she heard. They didn't get her. Crystal, despite her wounds, insisted on speaking to detectives herself. She described the night in agonizing detail. How Robert locked her front door. How April screamed when the knife hit her. How she watched her brother's faces, calm, cold, familiar. How they turned on her, stabbed her, and left her to die. She said what haunted her wasn't the pain. It was the way they didn't flinch. They looked satisfied, backing Broken Arrow. The community was reeling. A candlelight vigil gathered more than 1,000 people on the street in front of the Bever home. Tears streamed. Prayers were whispered. A woman collapsed holding a teddy bear meant for Victoria. One sign read, "How did this happen here?" Another said, "Evil lived behind the door." The district attorney announced 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill for both Robert and Michael Bever. They were held without bond. Robert was 18, tried as an adult. Michael, just 16. Prosecutors fought to try him as an adult too. They succeeded. This decision sparked national debate. Should a 16-year-old be held fully responsible for something so brutal? The DA had no doubts. This was not an impulsive act. This was meticulously planned mass murder. Age does not excuse that. At a press conference, a reporter asked, "What about the 2 surviving sisters?" The DA paused. They are victims, not just of that night, but of years of isolation and abuse. They deserve peace now. We will protect them. The courtroom in Tulsa County was packed the day Robert Bever made his first appearance. Reporters from across the country filled the pews. Cameras waited outside like vultures. And in the front row sat someone who refused to look away. Crystal. She wore a scarf over her neck. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands trembled, but her eyes didn't. She looked at her brother as he entered the room in shackles, flanked by deputies. He didn't look back. Robert Bever pled not guilty. His defense attorney floated the idea of an insanity plea. Said Robert suffered from psychosis, that he was deeply mentally ill and incapable of understanding right from wrong. But the prosecution came prepared. They had detailed journals with no signs of delusion, a timeline of planning that stretched back 18 months, footage of Robert talking about the killings before they happened, Crystal's testimony. Crystal clear and sharp as glass when Michael was brought in. He looked younger than anyone expected. He was short, with a round face and eyes that darted constantly. Some spectators whispered, "He's just a kid." But the prosecution reminded them, this kid stabbed his 7-year-old brother in the chest and then kept going. Michael's defense team argued he had been brainwashed, that Robert controlled him, that he was a victim too. The state disagreed. He could have warned someone. He chose not to. He wanted to be part of it. Crystal took the stand. She wore a black blouse, a silver cross necklace, and the same scarf over her neck. When asked what she remembered, she didn't flinch. They planned it. I heard them. They talked about it like it was a video game. They wanted to beat a high score. The courtroom fell silent. She looked at the jury. I wasn't supposed to live. They thought I was dead. I want you to know that, in a powerful moment, the prosecutor showed the jury one of Robert's journal entries. She'll be easy. Too trusting. We'll slit her throat first, so she can't scream. And yet, she did scream, and she lived. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They had seen the evidence, photos too graphic to show on the news, diagrams of blood spatter, copper footage of the brothers preparing the night before, and the cold, detached interviews where Robert detailed the killings like he was narrating a tutorial. There was no confusion, no uncertainty, only horror. Robert Bever was found guilty on all 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill. He received 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He would never walk free again. For Michael Bever, the case was trickier. His defense leaned hard into the child follower argument that he had been manipulated, that he didn't fully understand what he was doing, that at 16 he couldn't truly grasp the weight of his choices, but the jury saw otherwise. The wounds on the victims, especially the dozens of stab wounds on 7-year-old Christopher and 5-year-old Victoria, told a different story. Michael Bever was convicted on all counts. The judge handed him 5 consecutive life sentences as well, because of his age at the time of the crime. He would have a parole hearing after 38 years when he would be 54. When the verdict was read, Crystal wept silently. She didn't collapse. She didn't cry out. She simply exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the night they came for her. She later said in an interview, "Justice doesn't bring them back, but at least now they can't hurt anyone else." After the sentencing, the Bever home, now an infamous murder site, became a target for trespassers and morbid thrill-seekers. Neighbors begged the city to intervene. Eventually, it was torn down. In its place, the community built Reflection Park, a small, peaceful space with benches, trees, and a stone memorial carved with the names of the 5 who were last not. It reads, "In memory of April, David, Daniel, Christopher, and Victoria. Love survives." Crystal and Autumn were placed in foster care. Later, a distant relative took them in. Crystal finished high school and now speaks occasionally about trauma recovery. She's private. She avoids cameras. But her story continues. A survivor not just of a single night, but of a lifetime of quiet control, unspoken violence, and the brothers who try to erase everything, she said once, when asked if she forgives them. "No, but I survived them. That's enough." In the weeks after the sentencing, Broken Arrow returned to something like normal, but not really. Families double-locked their doors now. Teachers asked more questions when students missed assignments. Neighbors paid closer attention to who smiled and who didn't, because everyone kept asking, could this have been stopped? Some said yes, the signs were there. The brothers had been withdrawn for years. They were never seen at social events. No one had been allowed inside the Bever house ever. Others blamed the parents. David and April had homeschooled their children in complete isolation. They pulled them from public programs, denied outside friendships, and cut the internet down to monitored fragments. Except for Robert's laptop, they claimed it was about protection. But in that secrecy, 2 sons had built a world of death. Later, reports showed the boys had researched over 50 mass killers. Robert idolized school shooters. Michael memorized police response times. They studied bomb making and had already ordered body armor online. They wanted to become gods of destruction, not just kill their family, but continue with a nationwide spree. The only reason that didn't happen, Crystal, she fought, she ran, she bled, and she lived. Today, Crystal rarely speaks publicly. She finished school under a different name. She keeps her location private. No social media, no press tours. But when she does speak, it's powerful. A tear-closed-door victim advocacy event. She once said, "I was raised in a house that looked normal, sounded quiet, and felt cold. But inside that quiet, 2 people were preparing a war. I didn't survive because I was brave. I survived because I had no choice." She now works with survivors of domestic violence and children who've escaped abusive homes. She tells them one thing: you are not what they did to you. Autumn, the baby who was spared, is now growing up safe. She knows what happened, but she knows love too. That's what Crystal fought for. Where once stood the Bever home now rests a single stone surrounded by trees. Visitors leave flowers. Sometimes teddy bears. Sometimes nothing at all, just silent prayer. Reflection Park is quiet, not the cold silence of what once was, but the kind that means peace. A new couple walks past every now and then. They don't know the full story, only the outline. But if they stop to read the plaque, they might feel a chill. And maybe they'll hold their children a little closer that night, because evil doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it grows in silence behind locked doors, drawn curtains, and sons who smile too little and watch too much.